Secondly, your phrasing is misrepresenting the issue. Has a pussy and has tits isn't so much the issue. The real issue is grew a pussy, albeit incomplete, in utero. Not because of the pussy itself, but because of what growing a pussy, even one that is not fully formed, would indicate for the rest of the phenotype.
Ooh, hear that pin drop? Told the doc I was sick of looking at ink blots.
G'day yous, how you gone? So first things first, I want to give a shout out to Ayla, my very first Subscribe Star supporter. Let's fucking do this. Also, if you're looking for Gender Busters merch, there'll be a link in the description. This is another comment response video. It's about the phenotype debate. So before we begin this, I just wanted to say that I'm here for the debates. If I could respond to the comments while blanking the names, I would, because I don't really care about the specific people making them. I'm just interested in hashing out the ideas. So, without further ado,
Player 1
says, people who are not scientifically educated should stop using words like phenotype, because the issue is not is there a phenotype and whose phenotype is it, but why are you guys claiming that we have to accept genetically male people who look like women from the outside as women? And dude, do you understand that even intersex activists agree on CAIS is genetically male? Yes. Do you realize I literally illustrated this in one of my videos? I've gone to such extensive lengths to show that I recognize that XY is a male karyotype. Apart from some kind of like Men in Black memory erasing device, I don't understand how you could not realize that I've already established this.
Player 1 continues.
But what they don't agree is, would we allow these people into our single spaces? Why are you not getting what's going on? I don't know. To which I said, for the same reason genetically female people with a male phenotype, XX males, wouldn't be accepted into women's spaces. Genetic sex isn't the same as the sex of an organism. The sex of an organism is determined by the sex of its phenotype. So I'm going to read the next comment, and I'm going to respond to each argument as it's made.
Player 1.
Dude, my dude. You rang.
Player 1.
I do like you, but you know shit. Ah, you. Right back at you, buddy.
Player 1 continues.
Stop using a word phenotype where you can just say external looks. This is incorrect. A phenotype is not synonymous with an external look. Every organism has a different external look, but every sexually dimorphic species has a separate male and female phenotype. The term phenotype in genetics, from Greek pheno meaning showing and typus meaning type, is the set of observable characteristics or traits of an organism. It's not just how something looks, it's a genetic set of characteristics or traits that are observable. So this is another way in which the definition of phenotype as external look is undermined, because it says not characteristics that are visible, but characteristics that are observable. So for example, the hip bone isn't visible, but it's observable. So even in this definition, it's acknowledging that it's not necessarily purely what's on the outside of a phenotype. So, for example, we both agree that the sex of an organism is not a surface level trait. However, sometimes a phenotype will be purely about coloring. As a rough example, think of blonde, black, and brown hair as 3 phenotypes. There's also the example mentioned in the video of jaguars with light and dark morphs. However, in addition to whatever other phenotypes they have, all sexually dimorphic species have both a male and female phenotype. For example, we all know that there are average height differences between men and women. We also recognize that it is possible to tell the difference between men and women's hands, for example, even though they have nothing to do with reproduction. This is because, as a sexually dimorphic species, the male and female phenotypes are not just the same model but with different plumbing. Male and female phenotypes are entire sets of characteristics and traits which include, but are not limited to, external looks. Phenotype has a specific meaning which is important to this debate. However, at the same time as not really understanding what the word means, you're also arguing that only a certain class of people can even understand the term. Where have we heard that before? The way you're trying to paint people as obsessed with phenotypes simply for understanding what the word means and using it in political discussions is an exact mirror of the way TRAs say that TERFs are obsessed with chromosomes. Anytime someone doesn't want people to look at something, they say you're obsessed with it. If there was no argument to be found in properly understanding what a phenotype is, then there would be no reason to be so concerned with discussions about it. If the argument was true, then understanding what a phenotype is should help us to better understand how and why it is so true. What is revealing about both your reaction to phenotypes and the TRA's reaction to chromosomes is that not only is it clear that neither group understands the implications of what they are erasing, at the same time, they are highly committed to making sure no one else is able to comprehend them either. Saying people who are not scientifically educated should stop using words like phenotype demonstrates the same defer to the science gods type thinking that TRAs do. I don't agree with this sentiment. I think that just like sex, phenotype, in the sense of a dimorphic species, is a fairly basic concept. It's just that it's more complicated than simply what something looks like. For example, a sexually dimorphic species with 100 members would, strictly speaking, have 100 slightly different external looks. However, phenotypes, in the sense of genetics, refers to sets of external looks. And not only external looks, but any potential characteristics and traits based on those external looks. Phenotype is not akin to reporting what color something is, although it can be. Some phenotypes, or genetic sets, are to do with the coloring of eyes, hair, or fur, or whatever. However, in the sense of sexually dimorphic species, the male and female phenotypes, by definition, include how something functions in a reproductive and biological sense. This is based on the idea that, for example, the presence or absence of a female arrangement of observable parts is what makes a particular organism male or female. Furthermore, and this will never fucking get addressed, male or female could not be based on some religious original sin conception where whatever sex you start as is what an organism really is, because certain species change sex. And the way that we know when they have changed sex is based on their phenotype. Otherwise, your argument seems to be mirroring what the TRAs say, where they want to use the term gender as a way to remove sex from biology and make it a strictly human concept. The definition of sex crosses species. It has to apply to all species. So what about those species that change sex? I imagine there's no answer for this. So what about those species that change sex? So what about those species that change sex? Biological function is an inherent characteristic of the male morph and female morph in sexually dimorphic species. For example, women with CAIS and XY chromosomes have labia. Labia have a specific function which is in part structured around the production of large gametes. That's why labia are a female type of external genitalia. In addition to that, observable characteristics and traits are not at all synonymous with external looks. For example,
Player 1.
keep saying how they look on the outside, as though it would be possible, in the absence of any form of cosmetics, to have the appearance of a female phenotype on the outside, but then have a male phenotype underneath. It is a mistake to think that information that is gleaned from direct observation means that the characteristics are therefore surface level. It is not simply the observable characteristics and traits that are showing, it is about the types of what is showing. Phenotype does not refer to the traits themselves, but specifically to a particular collection to which the traits belong. In a sexually dimorphic species, the male and female morph consist of a constellation of characteristics that include things like gonads and genitals in species where they apply. The reason we are using the sex of the phenotype to determine the sex of the organism is because male and female are definitions that do not just apply to humans. The only physical characteristic that, for example, male plants, fish, animals, and people all share is the sex class of their phenotype. There's no balls on a male tree.
Player 1.
Then says, genetically female people with a male phenotype usually do not want to be accepted into female spaces because they have a dick, dude. To which I said, what you just did is rewrite my argument so you could answer a different question. What I said was that they wouldn't be accepted into women's spaces. You moved the focus from what society, including, I believe, yourself, would want, which is these people to be excluded from women's spaces, on the basis that they have a male phenotype, to what the people with the condition themselves would like. So I don't understand why you are yelling, they have a dick, dude, when the whole point of my argument was assuming that that was the situation. We had an example of a person with a male karyotype and a female phenotype, and so I was presenting the counterexample of a person with a female karyotype and a male phenotype. And all of a sudden, you didn't give a shit about the karyotype and suddenly were very concerned about the phenotype. I don't know, sounds like TRA thinking to me. Then
Player 1.
says, but even all this, it's not important because these people are very rare. To which I said, I've heard TRAs make that same argument and it's wrong in both cases for the same reason. Obviously, the classification of a small group of people can have major implications beyond the people themselves.
Player 1 continues.
You're practically putting yourself into a conversation among women about who should be accepted as women in our female spaces. To which I said, isn't that true of the entire gender identity debate? Why is it that it's only now that you disagree with what I'm saying that it's become a problem? After all, I've made a bunch of videos where I not only put myself into conversations that could be perceived as how you described, but I've even made videos about specific women, and never once have you or anyone else said anything like, hey, you don't have a right to speak about this issue because you're a man. I imagine because, evidently, you disagreed with those women, so my activities were seen as positive. I've even made 2 long-ass videos specifically about phenotypes, and still nothing. No one ever said anything about phenotypes being a TRA plot, because to do so would be insane, given that we have established that you don't understand what the word phenotype means. It's pretty clear that your motivation for taking the position that you do has to do with social considerations more than logical reasoning. The issue, as far as you understand it, is that a particular group of people who you perceive to be a threat are upset by what you are saying, and that is why you are saying it. It will become even more clear reading some of your other comments that you are taking positions because of who you believe it will upset and not because of the validity of the argument. For example, in another comment thread on one of my videos, you said, they literally call them women because they look like women from the outside. Not so much to me, I recognize the male voice and male hips too, sorry for being so blunt. To which I said, I believe this is a crazy thing to say, in part because it contradicts the consensus that both sides have already established. For example, XY people with CAIS have female hips. And that's not a concept I've invented because you just said you could see them. Now, again, because any previously established premises will obviously instantly be forgotten, let's also remember that female and feminine are 2 different things. A person could have masculine-looking female hips or feminine-looking male hips. But the point is, the male hip bone and the female hip bone come from two separate phenotypes. If XY people with CAIS actually had male hips, then they would have a male phenotype and there would be no argument. But they don't. So for you to say that you can recognize the male hips, which objectively are not contained in the people you are alleging that they are, appears to demonstrate your willingness to take positions that are clearly wrong based on who you believe it will upset and potentially who you believe it will endear you to.
Player 1 continues.
CAIS males are chosen by the TRAs to argue that phenotype sex, quote unquote, of theirs should be accepted as a woman. To which I said, phenotype doesn't belong to TRAs, it belongs to genetics. The fact that you're trying to pretend like the term phenotype is a TRA construct is one of the things that makes me most sure you are incorrect.
Player 1 continues.
All of them are currently going nuts about it because Exculansic was factual and challenging the current understanding of where is the limit on female sex. Big if true.
Player 1 continues.
And you're also going out of your way to argue with me that anyone who has a pussy externally and has tits is a female. To which I said, to say going out of my way is total Darvo. You are in my comment section in regards to an issue that I have been making videos about for more than a year, and you've responded not because I've said anything different to what I've already said. In fact, a large part of what I'm saying now is just catching people up on my position. You're commenting now because your understanding of the significance of the issue has changed. You don't own the word phenotype. You don't even understand the word phenotype. So, given that your position changed when I spoke about the issue, as I always have spoken about the issue, it prompted you to go out of your way and leave a comment. In fact, very many comments. Even going so far as to get into multiple fights with other commenters. If I was in your comment section, that would be me going out of my way, but my own YouTube channel is not out of my way. It kind of couldn't exist without me. Although, who knows what Google owns these days, right? Secondly, your phrasing is misrepresenting the issue. Has a pussy and has tits isn't so much the issue. The real issue is grew a pussy, albeit incomplete, in utero. Not because of the pussy itself, but because of what growing a pussy, even one that is not fully formed, would indicate for the rest of the phenotype. You can understand that if the phenotypes are constellations of characteristics, then it is obvious how we may be able to determine from one part of the phenotype of an organism what sex class the rest of the phenotype is. But because you don't understand that phenotypes are sets of characteristics, you wouldn't understand that. But for the people playing at home, men don't grow pussies, even external ones. Next,
Player 1
said, why do you think those males born with CAIS have more rights to be called women than a man who cuts his dick off and gets a pair of tits to closely resemble a woman? The difference between Tims and women with CAIS and XY chromosomes is that in the case of men with trans identities, you are mistaking a male phenotype for a female phenotype, whereas girls born with CAIS and XY chromosomes are born into female bodies. Then
Player 1
says, there's something called female intuition. It's a gut reaction typically seen in females who have a uterus in our gut. I do believe in my intuition, and wait a while, you're going to see I'm right, and Exculansic is actually brilliant for stirring shit in 2022. To which I said, if this is the quality of the thinking that you are doing with two brains, then I'm glad you're not struggling with just one of them. Maybe your uterus can explain to you what a phenotype is.
Well, we are sorry that you experienced that with our services. If there's any way we can win back your business, In fact, I'd love to set you up with 20 free tickets to a comedy show.